What's going on, guys? In this video we're going to talk about some Iren news. We do have a notification on when their earnings will be, and we also have some recent news today regarding some GPUs. We'll also talk about Microstrategy and their recent purchase and look at the chart, as well as some recent Bitcoin news. We do have a massive whale that has been selling, and I think that explains the drop over this weekend. Now, as for Iren, they are going to be reporting earnings on Thursday, August 28th. This is just coming right up. So be on the lookout. Remember, this is the most efficient Bitcoin miner. They have more consistent profitability than others, and I do expect them to post another profitable quarter. We do have some pretty big news regarding a purchase of NVIDIA GPUs, as well as the securing of $102 million in financing. As for this funding, this was for prior Blackwell GPU purchases. They secured $102 million in financing in respect of a prior purchase of Blackwell B200s and B300 GPUs. And this is a 36-month lease for 100% of the purchase price of those GPUs. And this financing will release funding to support further growth initiatives, including acquiring more GPUs. Iren also secured an additional 4,200 B200 GPUs for about $193 million. Conversations regarding financing are underway for those GPUs. They did make an initial cash payment. Now these B200s will be installed at their Prince George campus. And this doesn't really affect their Bitcoin mining side of things. They're still going to have their mining capacity remaining at 50 exahash or so, because they're utilizing spare data center capacity at other sites. This will bring them up to 8,500 NVIDIA GPUs, 800 H100s, 1,100 H200s, 5,400 B200s, and 1,200 B300s. Iren's Prince George campus can handle up to 20,000 Blackwell GPUs because of their 50 megawatts of total power capacity. Now I will leave those down below for you if you want to look over them yourselves. I pretty much covered most of it, but I want to point something out on Iren that's a bit concerning, and we have seen this in the past, a bearish RSI divergence. And let me show you. We had the RSI peak out and then hit a lower high, whereas the price hit pretty much an equal high and the RSI was already dropping. This did mark a top back in July of 2023. Another time, and these aren't the only examples, these are just ones that I'm pointing out. Another time the RSI peaked right here, the price went higher, the RSI went lower, and also formed a bit of a head and shoulders. But this pretty much marked the top at that timeline as well. Again here, we had a higher high, but the RSI had equal highs. This also marked a short-term top. We are doing it again. We have the RSI that hit a high here and is selling off while the price is continuing higher. So if you're in Iren, it might be a good time to trim some profits, prepare some cash for some lower prices, be a little cautious, don't necessarily buy these tops. It could of course keep running on hype, maybe Bitcoin starts turning around, maybe we see AI sector as a whole to start running, in which case Iren could continue to run. But just know that the risk is quite elevated and we do have those bearish divergence, and Iren does tend to see these bearish divergences and play them out. I also wanted to mention, as for this pattern, this support that it follows and this resistance that it has found as resistance, it is at that point now. So my main point in showing you this chart is just to exercise some caution. Iren, from the cycle low of around $1 to where it is now, has done about a 22x. It has massively outperformed Bitcoin. Can it do more than that? I do think so, but maybe a cool down is in order first. I do want to talk about a Bitcoin whale that made a ton of money, sold 24,000 Bitcoin. They still hold about 152,000 Bitcoin at a value of $17 billion. What they sold was about 2.7 billion worth. That 24,000 Bitcoin, that is. And this kind of puts things in perspective, as said by Willy Woo. The reason Bitcoin's been slow to rise in this cycle is because the supply of Bitcoin centered around the large whales that peaked their holdings in 2011. I would argue that it's also slower to rise this cycle compared to past ones because of its massive market cap. The larger it gets, the more it takes to move it. But I digress. This kind of puts things in perspective. They bought their Bitcoin at $10 or lower. It takes $110,000, depending on Bitcoin's current price, of new capital to absorb every single Bitcoin that they sell. Some of these whales have been in Bitcoin and crypto for a long time. They know how these cycles work. They know at the end of the cycle is usually alt season. A lot of them are preparing for that. And we saw that with some massive inflows from these spot Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs. While Bitcoin had some good inflows, Ethereum had better ones. And last week, there was a day where Bitcoin sold off even more than Ethereum. Their outflows were much larger. Normally, when Bitcoin sells off, the alts sell off even more so. But that hasn't really been the case lately. Ethereum is near its all-time high. Whalewire CEO Jacob King said most of the money is being moved into Ethereum. 2 billion bought and 1.3 billion staked. You can look at this in many ways. You can look at it as a negative because obviously someone is selling and they still have a lot more Bitcoin they could sell if they want to. Another way you could look at this is these whales, these massive whales, as they sell their Bitcoin, they get less impact in the future. It kind of clears the air for future moves where these whales won't have as much holdings to sell. One day, all these original adopters, all these early adopters, they will have sold so much of their Bitcoin that they won't be able to impact price because they don't have any left. Some will sadly pass on. Some could lose their wallets, and of course, some will sell their Bitcoin. You can't blame them for it. I mean, many of them can just retire as billionaires in many cases. Now, on the buy side of the news, we do have news that Microstrategy acquired more Bitcoin. They now hold 632,000 Bitcoin. They acquired 3,000 Bitcoin, and compared to the 24,000 sold, this is basically an eighth of that. But this is something MicroStrategy does basically every week. Of course, the purchases are different sizes, but this is something we can expect from MicroStrategy. They could just continue to accumulate. One day they will have 1 million Bitcoin, or about 1/20th of the total supply of Bitcoin to one entity, which is kind of insane if you think about it. Now, looking at MicroStrategy on the chart, if you were wanting to buy it back when it was in the 400s, back in the 500s, what's keeping you from buying it now at a much better time? One thing I'm watching for is this descending trend. We have bounced off of this twice. If we come up as a resistance, get rejected, I do think we are going to hit this ascending line that we have utilized multiple times as well, going back to about a year ago. And we had a similar pattern back here in late 2024, early 2025. We kept finding this as resistance until we eventually hit this support, broke out, and you got a big reaction on the breakout. The market is watching this. If we can break this, there will be a reaction in my opinion. MicroStrategy came down and filled its gap that was back here at about 350. I do think mstr is a good ad in the low 300s. Can it go lower? Sure. It is also attempting to hold this previous resistance zone. It was a previous resistance at times. You saw a reaction on the breakout. First it got rejected and then a breakout. It is trying to hold this roughly 345 area as a support. We'll see what happens there, but I do think a bounce here and add on the breakout could be a great swing trade as we end this cycle. If you believe in the 4-year cycle, you believe that Bitcoin is going to end this year a little higher, alt season will continue on, and Bitcoin will see prices we haven't seen in its history. Every cycle in Bitcoin's past usually ends right around November, December. And that's always 1 year after the halving. This is 1 year after the halving. This is the following year after the halving, 2025. If you believe in the cycle, then you believe there will be some pullbacks in 2026 and some great opportunities. So just know that buying MicroStrategy or buying the Bitcoin miners at this time in the cycle is a lot more risky than buying them back in 2022, back in 2023, when Bitcoin was anywhere from 15 to 30,000. And when MicroStrategy split adjusted was in the 30s. So just realize, there is a lot of risk to the downside, whether you're talking about the Bitcoin miners, Bitcoin, the alts, MicroStrategy. But do I think something like MicroStrategy is a good DCA over time? A good buy on some major pullbacks? I do think so. But let me know what you guys think. Is it too late to be buying the Bitcoin miners, MicroStrategy, Bitcoin, the alts? Or is now still a fantastic time after a pullback like this? Weighing out the risks and the rewards, I do think now is an okay time to be accumulating the stocks and crypto plays you like, but also keeping the cycle in mind and having a potential exit plan if things don't go higher in November and December, like we have seen in every cycle. But thanks as always for watching, guys, and I will see you tomorrow.